So first of all, I'd like to thank everyone for attending this webinar. I know in these challenging times, taking an hour out of your day can be difficult, so we truly appreciate your attendance. Over to everyone and rethinking your channel strategies. Our panelists today are prominent in their respective areas, and I think we're going to have a robust dialogue, gain some unique insights into the current state of retail. With that being said, I'll go through the introductions, and then we'll start with the panel discussion. As Alison mentioned, my name is Amar Joshi. I'll be your moderator for today. I'm the Management Consultant in Toronto Market Lead for RSM. John Nicolopoulos, the National Retail and Restaurants Leader for RSM. Diane Brisebois, the President and CEO of the Retail Council of Canada. Tyler Preet, the Market Development Manager for Shopify. And Nick Pinto, the Director of Customer Success at integrate.ai. So now let's get into the panel discussion. And I think just to set the landscape and the foundation, and the first question to ask is, what is the current state of retail in the U.S. and Canadian markets? And what is the general consensus we're seeing with retailers? And, I'd like to pose that question to Diane, first of all, to provide the Canadian perspective, and then pass it off to John to provide the U.S. perspective and draw out some similarities and differences.
Thank you, Amar. I can only answer that question by split two parts. As in the U.S., we have essential retailers and non-essential retailers. So the retail landscape is quite different. Obviously, for the essential retailers, specifically grocery, drug chains, and mass merchants, they're extremely busy. They are, in fact, their reported results indicate that they've done quite well, and they continue to do so. Saying that, they've had to adapt very quickly and increase operating costs to ensure their customers and their employees are safe. But that sector is very solid, and in fact, the food supply chain in Canada is extremely healthy. However, on the other side, the non-essential retailers, that I would lie if I didn't say it was bleak. Setting aside the incredible growth in online commerce for most of the mid and large retailers, we are expecting at least 30% of our retail businesses to not make it to the end of the year. Now, again, there are some conditions. It depends on some of the measures that the federal government may introduce soon in regards to liquidity and rent abatement. But if those don't come quickly, I think we're going to see a shrinking of the retail and footprint in Canada, especially when we talk about general merchandise. So challenging times, looking at it very seriously, and things we hope will change for the better. But we suspect it will be a tough ride for Canada in general merchandise retail going forward.
Thanks, Diane. Some good insights into the Canadian landscape. John, perhaps we can pass it over to you to provide some insights into the U.S. landscape.
Yeah, sure. And I agree with Diane completely. I think the retail landscape may be forever changed as a result of this. And it is really a tale of two very different retail worlds. As Diane said, demand shock has really hit the entire industry, right? On a positive side, on the grocery and essential area, and certainly on the negative side, apparel is struggling to create demand, and grocery is struggling to keep people safe and keep their shelves and cases full. Just to put it into perspective, U.S. Department of Commerce numbers for March showed grocery up 27%, and conversely, clothing down 52%. And I got a bunch of other numbers here I could share with you, but that really sort of defines the different parameters and what Diane was saying. I think that essential retailers are going to continue to do well. They have had higher costs, and they are certainly struggling with supply chain issues and needing to merge supply chains, actually, because when you really think about it, on the restaurant side of things versus the retail side of things, or grocery side of things, in the U.S. anyway, there was more money being expended into restaurants for food away from home than there was for food to be prepared at home coming into this virus. And now suddenly you have this dramatic increase, yet the supply chains that go into food service still have an enormous amount of merchandise that needed to shift. In terms of going forward, I think we're all thinking that the holiday season is going to be a little bit bleak for apparel and some other categories. It's probably going to be an 18-month recovery. And, we can expect some of the shift to online to probably continue. Maybe not at the same rate, but certainly at a higher rate than what we initially had anticipated. We think consumers are going to be more value-focused with high unemployment and just general lack of consumer confidence. And I think we're going to see a lot of bankruptcies, unfortunately.
Amar, let me just add, because there's a big difference between the U.S. and Canadian market, specifically with online. As we know, the Canadian market was not as mature as the American market for online sales. So we're seeing more difficulty in the Canadian market because so many of the mid and in fact some of the large retailers have had to ramp up. They did not have the infrastructure or resources internally to take advantage of a bad situation. So we think that in the categories that John noted, we're probably going to see a larger decrease and more mortality in that sector because it's taking them longer to ramp up. And I think the other issue that we all need to think about is what will Black Friday look like? So our world has changed, and so it will be interesting to see how sales shift and what people are buying. And again, as John said, we're looking at a Canadian consumer wallet that is shrinking by the minute. And so disposable income, which our discretionary retailers depend on, is going to be a challenge.
Thanks, Diane. I appreciate that. And I think both of you, I think that provides some really good insight into where we are and some of the challenges that lay ahead with retail. And, quite frankly, inevitably, these challenges are going to cause some changing and some shift in consumer behaviors and buying trends, which leads into my next question. How do retailers begin to understand what their consumers need in this current climate? So, Diane, I know you can probably nicely flow into it based on what you're just saying. So how about we start with you?
Well, I wish I could tell you that they know. There's an enormous amount of market research that's being done at this time. But because this is so new, it is, they are looking at the data. God, I mean, you get about 5 to 10 studies a day on the impact of coronavirus on the population. So, you get dizzy by looking at the numbers. And as Nick and Tyler well know, analyzing that data, understanding it, and then projecting. The challenge in Canada with the non-essential retailers, especially those who may not be on a strong platform like Shopify or have a strong platform of their own, there's no historical data. They will have a hard time looking at what was and what is and interpreting that. So I think there's going to be a lot of experimental, we're going to see initiatives for retailers to try to get a better understanding. I think the greatest challenge is not just trying to understand where they're going, but also trying to find your place in that new world and make yourself relevant. And that's where the data will be extremely important, so that it's not just, it's product assortment, it's the right message, it's the right channels. All of that will need to be reconfigured, because we truly are going to look at a consumer who has changed for probably forever.
Okay, so maybe John, we can go back to you and provide some context on the consumer needs and what retailers need to begin to do to understand really what this shift looks like and what they need to do to attract and retain customers and consumers.
Sure, and I agree with Diane. Data is king in this case, but you can't really look at all the data that's been out there because the historical data really has no context in today's situation. But we can look at some of the major indicators. How quickly are people getting back to work? where are they spending? As Diane said, there are studies coming out almost daily, and finding that research channel that you're most comfortable with, that suits your sector or your category the best is really important. Where are people spending? Are they returning to crowded places? Are they traveling again? Because, think about it, there is somewhat of a silver lining here, and it's a very thin silver lining. But when we think about where people were spending over the past 10 years, there was a shift to experiential spending. People were traveling more. They were spending money on experiences. If people don't go back to those crowded places, if they're not traveling more, maybe they will spend a little bit more on things that they didn't spend on before. All of that said, if they're not working, they don't have consumer confidence, they may not spend at all. One point I'd like to make before I pass it back to Nick, hopefully his audio is working now, is I think his behavior is going to change by demographic. And when I say demographic, I mean socioeconomic, but also by age. One interesting point that I've read recently is the younger folks, the younger generations and age groups aren't quite as concerned about the long-term impact of this as some of the older demographics, which tells me that they may be more receptive to getting back into things sooner and spending sooner. The problem with it is that they're also the age group, at least in the U.S., it's been the hardest hit by unemployment. So there is this balance, there's this unknown. There are indicators out there. There's lots of research out there. Got to kind of just pay attention to what research seems to be tracking your customer, and then, communicate with your own customer base to understand what they're doing. If you've got a loyalty program and you can use that loyalty program to stay in touch and learn more, that's a great approach to get things going.
Great, thanks, John. Nick, back to you.
Can you guys hear me now?
We can.
Okay, apologize for that. What I want to talk about was, I think it's a really interesting current climate, and I think Deanne and John have kind of touched on it, and I think the new norm is going to be change going forward. And as a retailer, you really need to internalize that and understand what that means for your business. Consumers are faced in uncertain times right now, and even I think as we emerge out of the pandemic, it's going to be very hard to understand customer behaviors just based purely on what you know from your old data or your past data. And that's typically how, as a retailer, you've operated in the past. And one of the reasons for that is because customers are forming new habits and behaviors, and we're seeing this at an unprecedented pace, and we'll probably emerge sort of out of this with brand new brand as well as channel preferences. Everyone else on the panel, I think, has talked about how e-commerce is kind of it's not a luxury anymore. It's something that you have to do to survive. And the benefit is that hopefully you're getting really good data out of that, which you can use to fuel great insights about your customers and start to understand their behaviors. One of the interesting problems I think we're seeing is that even retailers with good data and insights are not finding that they know what to do with their customers because things are changing so quickly. So you could have a retailer that's pretty far along in terms of digital maturity, and they have an online platform and they have great data, they think, but it's hard for them to get any insights out of that because either they're struggling with their day-to-day operations to stay afloat, or they have platforms in place where they can't get insights out of it and they don't have time for people to do that. And there's, even if you do that, the historical data you have is not going to factor in any of the externalities we're seeing with COVID-19. So for example, if you're like a apparel brand, a high-end apparel brand, and you're used to knowing your customers and your segments, and they don't care about discounts and things, and maybe free shipping is not a big deal for them, now all of a sudden that can completely change around because there's less discretionary spend, people are tightening up their wallets, and people care about delivery to door so that you don't have to interact and pick up things. So what I would suggest to kind of understand your customers better is rely on your data, and if you feel that the data isn't rich enough, then you got to look at augmenting it. So either look at real-time data on your platforms. Can you see exactly what's happening right now, what's happened in the last few days, what's resonating and what's not, and kind of adapt to that? Or look at third-party insights you can get from industry or intelligence as to what's going on in the industry, what's going on with competitors, what's going on with COVID. So you can bring that all in and build this kind of complete picture of your customer. And I think that's going to help you adapt quickly to the behaviors.
Thanks, Nick, and Diane and John. I think that's fascinating. And it sounds like, some of these new consumer behaviors and buying patterns are here to stay. So retailers need to adapt. With that being said, my next question is broad, but I would like each of your perspectives on what are retailers doing in the short, medium, and long term to get back to performing at or better than pre-COVID-19 numbers. So Tyler, how about we start with you?
Yeah, for sure. And I'll do a quick audio check as well. We all good? Perfect. So I think just addressing the short term, as everyone kind of mentioned, there's a couple things going on, but no one really knows what actions to take. And so, I think it's important to note we're past that initial evaluation stage. If you haven't acted yet, now is the time to act. And so there's a couple things that I'd like to focus on here. One is, your actual channel strategy. Everyone said it, and I don't want to keep repeating it, but if you're not online when you can be online, it's time to go online. It can be daunting for a lot of retailers. And so what I would suggest to those retailers is lean on partnerships or platforms that are going to support you. We're happy to have a lot of platforms and partners in our ecosystem. So definitely just reach out. We're all in this together. The second is if you're online, reevaluate that your channel strategy in terms of how you're distributing those actual sales. Are you going all direct to consumer? Are you going through a marketplace like Amazon? How is Amazon in their prioritization of essential services affecting your goods getting to your consumers? So do a little bit of an audit on that. Again, we want to make sure that you're controlling that channel distribution, not COVID. We want to think about your physical channels as well. Instead of shutting down completely, are you able to open up and leverage those physical channels by doing things like curbside pickup? The engagement strategies, like Nick actually mentioned earlier, your consumer segments have shifted around. Rather than acquiring and focusing on that top of funnel, maybe it's a time to focus on the 20% of your customers that are driving 80% of the purchases. Maybe it's time to focus on gift cards and inject that cash flow into your business today. Maybe it's starting to position yourself as an essential good and engaging your customers that way. The last thing to kind of wrap all of this together is communicate. So don't just make noise for the sake of making noise. Actually communicate this new strategy, where customers can find your goods, how they can get them, shipping delays or shipping improvements, product line changes. Communicate all of that with your end buyer. Once you communicate that and they understand it, you guys can move forward together.
Amar, can I just jump in? Because, I was looking at the list of people who registered for the webinar, and while we're talking and focusing on retail and customer, we should talk a bit about vendors, and not just product vendors, but service vendors. Let me give you an example. This might sound rude, but I don't mean to be. I can't believe how many of the service vendors, consultants, are sending, in particular, these great recovery solutions. So every playbook that I'm getting now is called a recovery playbook. I open it, and from some of the top firms around the world, I open it and it's a pandemic playbook. It's Tyler said, we're no longer in phase one, we're in phase two. So as retailers and customers are changing lifestyle and how retailers are trying to respond to those different lifestyles and the new reality, I think a word of warning to all the vendors that you need to move quickly. A lot of the stuff that I'm seeing is being repackaged, and in fact, it's old pandemic emergency stuff. So vendors are going to need to really bring their best people and their best foot forward, because their customers, and in our case would be retailers, will have very few resources and very little time. And so they will not be looking at, assessing 5 different services. It will be word of mouth, and it will be those vendors who get it, respond quickly, and will add a lot of value to the relationship, who will survive. And I'm quite surprised. I've not seen many yet who have wowed me, where I sit back and say, wow, they get it. They know exactly what we're going through. And so I think a message of, kind of putting that on your list as well, because this is an ecosystem. And so vendors need to also step up. Whoops, sorry.
That was great. Thanks, Diane. John, maybe I can pass it along to you to talk about, the short, medium, and long-term impacts and what retailers need to do to kind of get back to or stabilize or exceed, pre-COVID-19 results and numbers.
Yeah. Well, I want to. I have a lot to say here, but I'd like to just zero in on one or two things. For some, they are still in survival mode, and they're still cutting costs and trying to just stay alive. And if you're in that phase, you need to stay in that phase, but you can't just be driving with your head down, trying to dodge the potholes. You need to pick your head up and you need to have a plan, and that plan needs to include your key people and your key advisors, and hopefully your advisors are better than some of the folks that Diane has gotten playbooks from, and they are spending time to understand your organization, your category first, your organization second, and then the landscape more broadly. On an intermediate basis, it really is about self-assessment and being realistic and not necessarily being overly, I don't know, I'm at a loss for the word right now, but I think many of us get very emotional about the businesses that we operate, and we need to have a rational approach and understand what we really need to do. And in many cases, reorganization is what needs to happen for some retailers that were not strong coming into this, but surviving. The ones that were surviving and doing well, it's a whole different ballgame. It's almost like doubling down. If you've got an e-platform, continue to invest in that and watch those channels, as Tyler said. I mean, I loved Tyler's response because it was really a response that was based in, these are the things that are working, understand why they're working, and do more of it. And I think that's very, very true. And I think the flip side of that is understand what wasn't working before. It's not getting any better post-COVID. Let's react to it and pay attention. In the longer term, I think it's all about data and customer service. And I don't mean necessarily hand-to-hand customer service at the counter. Customer service can be digital customer service, right? It's about, making each transaction as frictionless as possible and putting the right product at the right place at the right time, but it can be digital. It doesn't necessarily be in a bricks and mortar location. One of the things that's really discouraging to me is, Coresight follows store openings and closings, and leading up to the COVID-19 situation, there were more openings than closings for the first time in a very long time. Bricks and mortar were starting to gain a little more traction in the U.S. Some of the massive closings were behind us. And I think that we basically, jumped on the brakes here, and that trend is going to stop, and we're going to have to reassess and almost go back to the beginning on that. But customer data, critical to create affinity. The better retailers that are surviving and doing a better job now are trying to drive demand. They're not sitting on inventory. If they've got an e-commerce platform, they're going out to customers. They're being aggressive. They're bringing them home and demonstrating to them that they care. So I'll stop at that and give somebody else a chance to respond further.
No, that was great. Thank you, John. Nick, I'd like to. Diane, would you like to chime in for a second?
Yeah, I feel terrible because I'm always interrupting poor Nick, who's trying to get on. But I think it's important to give a bit of a reality check here, and I don't disagree with Tyler or with John, but not all our businesses moved to online, and it's not going to happen anytime soon. So even if it goes from 7% in Canada to 30%, let's say, which would surprise me in the next 6 months, simply because the infrastructure isn't there. Let's remember, John, that one of the realities, and people on the phone need to remember this, is that, retailers are now trying to figure out what's my real estate footprint going to look like. And it's not because they're not going forward and being aggressive. The problem is, sorry, I've got a phone here. The problem is that they don't know. We're still waiting now for the federal government. There's one province that announced that they'll open on May 19th, but that maybe fashion won't open because no one's figured out change rooms yet. No one's figured out turn on clothing. Or what do you do if you're a Harry Rosen and you've got tailors, and that a good chunk of your business is tailoring? Well, there's a lot of question marks, which, so I do support the need for retailers to hunker down on their e-commerce business on their digital social media presence, on their messaging, on their product assortment. But on the other side, there are still a lot of problems and issues that haven't been resolved. So I think it's going to take a while to see some of that innovation, because in some cases it's out of their control. So I just thought I'd put a bit of a reality check. Thanks.
Thanks, Diane. I think that was a good reality check.
Amar, if I could just respond to that briefly. Just to clarify, Diane, I agree with you. Bricks and mortar is not dead, and in fact, it will always have a place. My concern is that many of our bricks and mortar retailers across North America have had underperforming units for a long time. And we're at a point, an inflection point, where we need to communicate with landlords. We need to not be short-sighted in that communication and not just try to get a rent holiday for 3 months, but be more aggressive about it. And that's all I'm saying. I'm saying, be realistic, understand what your platform looks like, that online versus bricks and mortar, and be realistic. And so I think you and I are probably saying the same thing in terms of being real. I think the online is a little bit more dominant in the U.S., predicting 22% pre-COVID for this year, probably be much more than that. But at the end of the day, it's still less than half. So I'm 100% with you. And if I created the impression with the listeners that I think it's all moving online, I don't. So I just wanted to clarify that.
Perfect. Thanks, John. Nick, let's pass it off to you to get your perspective on this.
Yeah, I think these have all been great points. I don't think there is a playbook at this time. And like everyone's mentioned, it's very sector and category specific. But I think we haven't touched on, if you can focus on your employees themselves, we want to make sure that you're keeping them safe, that they feel valued by your company. And then a second tactic, obviously, is focus on your customers. And I think this is reaching out to them with authenticity and not just messaging them to see what you can buy, what they can buy from you, but find out what their real problems are. And can you address that with any software or technologies or products or whatever it is that you can offer? Or can you do something there? And I think the third, from a business perspective, is you really need to, and we've talked about this, reevaluate what your business goals are and what KPIs you want to track against and measure. Find the gaps that you have, people, process, technology, product suite, whatever it is, and take action now. And Tyler's mentioned this, you can do it. Just go out there, try to take action, measure, test, iterate. It's going to be very different. Just to touch on KPIs, I think even that's changed from an e-commerce perspective. Everyone used to look at conversion optimization as the holy grail. And I think we're seeing the needle kind of shift, where things like margin optimization is very important now, because you have to do more with the less that you have. And it's about converting the right customers, giving them the experience they need, and then being able to build that brand affinity. And I think tied to that is also customer acquisition costs matter a lot more than they did before. And you saw this with a lot of retailers, at least online, in the first couple of weeks of COVID. We're just handing out discounts of 50, 60% on products to clear out inventory. But that's obviously not sustainable if this goes on for 1-2 months moving forward. We touched about what kind of actions you can take to identify your gaps, how to double down and capitalize on the problem, on the solutions, and put it out there. But I wanted to touch on one example that we have with a grocer that we're working with that, like Dan has mentioned, not everyone is further along the digital spectrum. So they are actually not, and they still have a real problem, which is they're trying to limit the high peak in-store traffic that they have to try to keep customers safe and keep their employees safe. So we're working with them to help them figure out how to incentivize customers through different channels so we can get them in at different times. And then that way, what we're doing is we're kind of sort of stabilizing the curve, and then spreading out when customers are coming in. And we're solving real problems, not necessarily with an e-commerce solution, but with a solution that's still very data-driven.
Yeah. Thanks, Nick. I think that was great from all four panelists, right? Some different points of view, but I think we're aligned to one overall theme, that retailers cannot be short-sighted in this time and really need to reevaluate their business models and strategies. Another theme I think that resonated and bubbled up was around the use of technology, and that kind of leads into the next question I have is, what types of digital capabilities are retailers looking at to meet consumer and business needs? Tyler, how about we start with you?
Yeah, for sure. I think it's important to note that retailers at this time, it's a fine line between how do we get to market fast, but then how do we also build for the long term? So I would just want to remind listeners, if you are going online or if you are doubling down in physical retail, whatever you are, do not lose sight of the fact that this is a long game. This is just a correction or a speed bump. And so specifically for commerce, I would advise that retailers really look at a platform that they can, get to market fast, build quick, get their products, get their pricing up and operational, but do not sacrifice the long-term scalability or reliability that a platform that is of high quality can actually provide. And that's not to say develop everything in-house, because obviously that's not going to be a fast time to market. The second thing that I want to call out is make sure that you are in control of the resources that platform or that solution actually costs you. So we're talking total cost of ownership here and resource allocation. You want to be able to be prepared for when the next correction happens, whether it is, God forbid, another virus or a recession. You want to be able to take the resources out of your maintenance or out of your upgrades or your security patches and reallocate those to product or growth or acquisition. Likewise, after a time like this happens, and your developer teams, your tech teams have already implemented those systems, how do you then repurpose them to something that is more growth oriented? So it's just really giving them a flexible yet scalable solution. And that's a blanket approach that I would apply, whether it's a commerce system or fulfillment partner. I would just take that approach to everything.
Yeah, thanks. So I think those were some great insights and would truly resonate with retail's people right now. So, John, how about your comments from you?
Yeah, I think it goes back to Diane's very first comment about it being sort of a tale of two retails. My description, but her idea. I think that, where the investment comes is really going to depend on where you are in your life cycle and what categories you're in. Some, certainly in grocery, a lot of the technology I would expect in digital capabilities to be around, online and delivery, but also warehousing and logistics and robotics and RPA and all of these technologies that can be that can really get product through the supply chain more quickly and get it to the shelf more quickly. I think for these folks, this change or this disruption shined a very bright light on some of the weaknesses that we all knew were there. And so I think there's a lot of investment that can be made from throughout the supply chain, and through ultimate sale to customer and delivery to customer. I think for others, it's e-commerce, but it's more than that. It's really the data and the automation in my mind. It's understanding who your customers are, and I know we've all said that it's hard to know that right now, the consumer behavior piece. But to me, it's really on the long-term game that I think Nick, or maybe it was Tyler that said it, it is a long-term game here. And if we can get over this hump, the key to success in the long term is really being able to keep up with change and understanding through the use of your data and third-party data, who it is your customer is, what it is that they want, and how do you satisfy those needs. So I think it really depends on what category you're in. But there's certainly customer facing, and then there's supply chain, and then there's back office, all of which should be integrated together in some sort of a master plan. And I know not everybody can afford to do it in that and do that assessment first, but quite honestly, it's worth the investment to do that assessment, build that plan, and then cherry pick where the investments are going to provide the most value for the dollars spent and spend in those areas.
Thanks, John. Nick, perhaps you can provide your thoughts on some of those digital capabilities that retailers are looking for.
Yeah, for sure. I think they're all great points so far. One of the things that I want to just call out is I think you need to reorient your business to this idea of a digital commerce mindset. And especially if you're you just started or you have a pretty well-defined commerce business or channel, it's really important to understand that that is your new focus going forward. That's going to be a primary marketing or sales channel, at least in the short term, probably in the long term, because that's not going to go away. So you really have to look at how can you target what you're doing for the customers that you have by expanding products, expanding services, expanding the ways that you interact with customers and being able to deliver on that. And it really takes this idea of embedding your digital capabilities across your whole operations. John talked about back office supply chain. I mean, I can speak a bit more to the e-commerce side. It's really having that great e-commerce platform that can help you test and iterate and try new things. And we're seeing that with a lot of brands right now. I mean, you have certain retailers that are taking the associate in-store kind of style that they have of interacting with customers and now taking it online with video conferencing or whatever else that they want to offer there. Or even like glasses stores letting you now try on glasses using augmented reality and interesting technologies like that. And I know not everyone is as savvy from that perspective, but even using video more, where you can't go in store right now as a consumer and try something on. So seeing a video of the experience of what it's like to do that, I think resonates a lot more now than just looking at product pictures and things like that. Another key thing I think Tyler talked about is delivering to customers, or how you get it to that last mile. And there's very cool technologies from things like curbside pickups we talked about, touchless payments, accelerated checkouts. I think all these things are going to be the norm, and we see everyone from sort of teenagers all the way up to like, I know my parents have started using like curbside pickup and all that for the first time. So it's really great, and people are adapting to use this. And I think once they do that, they're going to want to keep doing that going forward. And it comes back to technology platforms. Make sure you have that real-time data, third-party insights, and you can offer from an e-commerce platform a very seamless and personalized experience for your customers. And one more point to that, I think underlying all of this is having the right and rich data to be able to action on that. And, with the way we've helped certain retailers, we're looking at putting out solutions there where they tap into our customer intelligence platform. They gain real-time insights about what's going on and can leverage things like machine learning and AI to be able to understand the customer needs, incentive the right way, and then provide them experiences or discounts or offers or whatever it takes to sort of nudge them over and be able to buy from you and build that brand affinity with you. And I think that's very important going forward, having platforms that allow you to test, iterate, deploy quickly, and learn what's working.
Yeah, thanks, Nick. And I couldn't agree more with what each one of the panelists have said. And, in my conversations with my clients over the past month and a half, I've seen kind of that two sides of the coin. One is, there's a need for something new, some sort of new digital capability to kind of stabilize and survive. And then the second side of that coin is, looking at different technologies that have already been identified, but how to accelerate the implementation and get them up and running sooner. So I think that was a great dialogue and insight from all four of you guys. Now that we've discussed the retail landscape, what retailers are doing in the short, medium, long term, and some of those digital enablers, I'd like to end on this last question before we get into some Q&A, if we have time from the audience, on hopefully a thought-provoking question. What are some of the innovative insights or advice that you can share with retailers across North America? And Diane, how about we start with you?
You'd have to do that to me, wouldn't you? I just want to, in answering that question, Amar, I also want to add to what Nick, Tyler, and John said about digital. I think the biggest transformation and the advice that we would have for retailers, especially those who are starting to embrace their digital lives footprints and their e-commerce footprints, is that for the longest time, brick and mortar retailers said, well, customers can't truly experience my product online, and it's sterile. I suspect that it will not take very long for online selling and buying becoming very human. I think the new technologies that were experimental technologies will become real very quickly, where consumers will feel that personal touch, that personal connection online. So, everyone will have a real avatar. Everyone will be able to try clothing and nearly feel the colors and the textures. And if we think that that's, in the years to come, I suspect that retailers need to understand that that is sooner versus later. So it's no longer brick and mortar driving online. It really will be online driving brick and mortar. However, saying that, one of the things that we're seeing in all of the research we're doing that no one's talked about yet, which is going to be very important for retailers and their supply chain, is that consumers are already telling us that they are recognizing the brands that are stepping up, the brands that are doing the right thing, be it if they're semi-closed, closed, or they're operating as essential retailers. So we talked for a very long time about corporate social responsibility and being part of the community and being authentic. Those were really nice things to put on your corporate social responsibility or CSR reports. Now, people will, in fact, measure you against those. We're starting to see that curve go up. So obviously that's the right curve. We don't want to see it flatten. That curve is going up. So I'll leave the experts on digital and on technology go deeper. But based on our experience, those are some of the things that retailers will set aside and say that's a nice to have, but not important to have. And we're saying now you better put it on your important list.
Perfect. Thanks, Diane. Tyler, it'd be good to get your insights on anything innovative or advice that you can share with retailers across North America.
Yeah, for sure, Amar. I think there's a lot of talk in the space about, essential and non-essential. And I think this is an important positioning exercise for all the brands to take. We all have our staples now. We all have our food now. Some of the smaller startups now know, their job security. So the hierarchy of needs is kind of established at the bottom. People are inevitably going to start looking for things to provide them joy in their day-to-day, or children's toys to keep their kids busy when they're working, new hobbies like puzzles to start. And so those aren't traditionally essential, but they can start to be positioned as essential as we kind of get ready and kind of sit into the new norm. I think, like I said earlier, we want to be deliberate in our engagement. There's a lot of noise in the space right now, both digital and physical. You're getting news everywhere. How can we talk to an audience that's going to listen to us? And like Nick mentioned earlier, there is no playbook on this. No one anywhere has been through this before. And so that kind of brings me to my third point, which is, be creative, right? Have fun. I understand that this is a pressing time and businesses are under a lot of stress, but nobody knows what is going to work. You know your customers better than someone next to you knows your customers. And so try new things, iterate, be creative. Try a contest if you've never tried a contest. If you're a physical retailer, how can you engage with your community beyond just you as a business? So I think those 3 points with the overarching theme that no one knows except for you, and no one knows until they try it.
Yeah, good insight. Thanks, Tyler. Nick, maybe you can provide your insights around innovative thoughts or advice that you can share.
Yeah, I mean, it's unique and challenging times, but I think you have a real opportunity as a brand to connect with your customers. So for them to understand what you value and for you to understand what they value from a very authentic perspective. And it's a great time also because I think even some of the very established big brands like Amazon are still kind of facing things like fulfillment issues, and there's high demand for essential products. So like Tyler mentioned, there's very creative things that you can do to maybe position yourself and fill the gap of being like an essential or sort of like a new type of essential service, and be able to resonate that with your customers, get them to be interested in what you're selling and what you're talking about, and overall sort of creating this, I think, a win-win type of solution. It seems very cliched, but I think it's very important to double down on what you as a brand think your value is and how you can help in the current atmosphere as well as going forward and long term. And then what you want customers to view out of you and what you want them to gain from you, but still trying to hit the business goals that you have, because that's very important. And if you can do that, I think you're going to hopefully manage through this period and emerge out of this pandemic with an even like stronger bond with your customers and drive that brand affinity that they have with you.
Great. Thanks, Nick. John, how about we close this question off with you, and maybe you can provide your thoughts on advice to retailers across North America.
Well, these folks all had great insights and advice, and I agree with everything that was said. I think we are in a unique situation right now where we do have that opportunity if we have the mechanism to communicate with our customers and demonstrate that authenticity and that we really care. And communicating and building that trust and getting out there and really promoting the brand. And you can really reshape or further shape what you want to represent as a brand, provided you have that ability to actually communicate. So I'm going to go back to something we talked about before, which is communication is critically important. It's communication with vendors. It's communication with your people, particularly if you want to get that workforce back and in place, and you don't want to have to retrain once we get through all of this. And it's above all communication with your customers so that they understand who you are and what you're doing. And I also agree with what Nick said about doubling down. If you know who you are and you have confidence in your brand and you have the ability to do it, we're going to come out of this with a lot of casualties, unfortunately. And when there are casualties, that means there's opportunities for survivors. And so for those brands and those retailers that have that ability, that foresight to strategically build a plan and drive that plan and stay focused on that plan, I think there can be a bright future. Certainly buying behaviors have changed, as we've said throughout, and it's going to be a new equation in terms of how we get to people and what their behaviors are and how we actually convert. But I do think that the opportunity is there as the landscape and the ecosystem shrinks a little bit. So don't be afraid to go after it and double down if you've got the confidence and the financial wherewithal to do it. The key is having that strategy and paying attention and leaning on the people that you have confidence in along the way.
Okay. Thanks, John. Thanks to all four of the panelists for answering that question. I think there are some good insights there and unique ideas. We do have a bit of time left, so there have been a couple of questions from the audience that I would like to pose to our group here. So the first one is from William O'Brien, and Tyler, maybe we can ask you this. How do you offset the cost to ship when everyone seems to want free shipping online? What are your thoughts on that, Tyler?
Yeah, I think, William, honestly, that's a great question. That's something I get asked every single day from retailers. And I think it's important to look at that and maybe take a step back, right? Why do companies offer free shipping? And for the most part, it's around conversion rate optimization. So that's one factor when you're a D2C brand. Second is consumers have begun to expect it with the rise of Amazon Prime. And so I think that there's room for people to offer free shipping. That being said, you don't have to. I wouldn't feel the pressure. If it is something that your business is looking to do, potentially experiment with items that you have higher margins for. We in Canada have varying shipping rates and are not blessed with the shipping rates that Americans have. And so potentially it's going to Canada Post and figuring what flat rate shipping is. If you can have flat rate shipping across Canada, you can then work backwards from there and figure out what items have the margins to do that on. Potentially you could build some logic in your checkout to say, if the cart is X value, then offer either subsidized or free shipping. And then also just, again, experiment with it. If you're losing on subsidizing shipping, potentially boost that average order value. Incentivize them to add more to the cart. Incentivize them to buy higher margin items. Make it a competition to see how you can implement loyalty to give someone higher tiers, boost that customer lifetime value over time, and then maybe roll free shipping out to your gold customers. That being said, there's tons of nuances, William, to this. So again, I'd be happy to connect with you offline and we can work through this, or the partners at RSM are very good at this as well. So we can definitely answer this offline in more detail.
Awesome. Thanks, Tyler. One more question from the audience that we have, which is an interesting one. The question is, retailers are seeing a surge in demand in specific subsectors. What considerations should be in place when trying to tackle the demand shock? John, I think you're probably in a good position to answer this one.
I think it depends on the sector. I mean, I think in grocery we've seen it mostly at this point, and I think they've handled it as well as they can. I think what our successful grocers have done, gone out and they found new sources of supply. We saw just recently that Cisco up in Canada announced that they were going to sell directly to consumers. Well, here in the U.S., we've got grocers that have made arrangements with the large food distributors that have been selling into the restaurant space to try to augment some of that demand shock and try to keep the shelves full. I mean, the other thing that they're experiencing, and unless you're a grocer, you may not understand it, is that many of the suppliers are not producing all the SKUs they had in the past. So if you've got a supplier that's got 15 or 20 facings in a particular aisle with 9 different SKUs, and suddenly they're only producing the top 5 SKUs because they can't keep up with the rest, then it's going to appear that the grocers are out of stock, and in fact they are, but it's only because the product legitimately is unavailable. So one of the things, as I said, is about creating new sources of supply, being a little bit more creative on logistics. We've had examples where clients of ours have negotiated contracts with other non-essential businesses to be able to utilize their trucks to be able to fill their stores from their distribution centers. It's all about being creative and having a plan in place and being able to react. But in that space in particular, it's mostly about keeping your people safe and doing the best you can with the situation that you're in. I will say, let me just add one more thing there, Amar, because going forward, there's certainly lots of other things, right? I mean, we're seeing things like automated warehousing and logistics in micro-fulfillment centers. So there's lots that can be done in the long term, but that stuff doesn't happen instantly. So in the immediate term, it's more about trying to create those other sources of product and being creative and not so parochial with your sources or your suppliers.
Amar, let me just add, because I know the question comes from a smaller retailer or a smaller vendor, but what we're starting to see is, the old buying groups. So we're starting to see solid, small and mid-sized retailers who may in the past have never had any reason to talk with each other, come together and see where they can find some efficiencies and sharing of services. We've seen vendors approach, and I think for vendors, especially the smaller vendors, I thought it was a great idea. We've had a couple small vendors want to do case studies with retailers they had never dealt with before, not those who didn't want to, but in different categories, and asking them where they think the demand is going to be, and coming basically shifting their manufacturing to start doing something new. We've seen it with masks, and we've seen it with PPE. So I think we're going to see a lot of that. But certainly, if it's a small business, the test runs that we've seen with small groups of retailers that we brought together have really paid off and allowed retailers to be able to source through other vendors that they would never have been able to source from, or to share when it comes to on the logistics side, so delivery, pickup, and the like. So I think we're going to see a lot of creativity. Right now, there's a lot of uncertainty, but I think there are great opportunities there.
Yeah, thanks, Diane. And Diane, actually, there's another question that came in that I think you'd be well suited to field. So the question is, although we see lots of grocery retailers are successfully are successful in sales during this pandemic, the cost of last mile issue to drive profitability has not been solved, forcing lots of these retailers to have a margin crunch. With the market dynamics changing, there's an increased need for solutions. Do you see a lot of retailers closing down brick and mortar to move to offset the operational costs?
If we're talking about grocery, I would say no. And if you just need to look at the experience in other markets, more mature markets. I mean, I think that the last mile is always going to be a challenge, unless Nick and Tyler disagree. It is, and in the grocery business specifically, because we're talking about razor-thin margins, and so it has always been extremely challenging. And it's, but I think that the brick and mortar format in retail is going to continue to remain strong. I think we're going to see more innovation in regards to, and I think what might help because of the crisis we're going through is that there is a lot of people discovering, the curbside pickup. And so there are different ways for grocery retailers to look at trying to reduce those costs by providing alternatives. And oddly, as we all know, often crises bring opportunities. But I don't think that we're going to see a time where we're not going to see real brick and mortar retail. In fact, I think you're not going to see that much of a shrinking in the footprint, but you're going to see a real mixed use in a lot of the stores. I don't know if it's happened in the U.S., but in Canada, they now are bringing organic growers as partners, and the center aisle is being redefined. Parts of the stores are being redefined. So I think that we're going to continue seeing that, very little shrink, and certainly retailers finding creative ways to decrease their costs around the last mile.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you, Diane. So I think this was a healthy dialogue over the past hour, and I'd like to thank everyone that dialed in to attend this call. I appreciate it. We all appreciate it. I'd like to thank our panelists for providing some really unique and encouraging insights into what the future of retail may look like. So thanks, everyone. Have a great day. Stay safe. And Allison, I'll pass it back to you.